All right. All right. So we are Urban 3. Urban 3 is located in Asheville, North Carolina. So some smaller mountains than you have, but mountains nonetheless. And I actually live in St. Paul, Minnesota. We are a fully distributed hybrid remote team. And I was telling Paige earlier, we have staff in Oklahoma City, New York City, Atlanta, Asheville, the Twin Cities, and who am I missing? I think that's everybody. So we're about staff of about 20 now. And as Post Falls has been growing, we've been growing over the last decade as well. And we're really excited to be working here in Post Falls. As of this week, we've worked in 47 of the 50 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And we've done work just north of you in Cochrane, Alberta, for instance, which is a Calgary suburb. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Lansing, Michigan. I will get out the map and show you where I'm from. And my dad was a city employee, and I grew up in Lansing here and City Hall there. Dad was actually born in Montana and graduated from Kooskia High School. Do y'all know where Kooskia is? It's a little blip. It's down south of you. Yeah. So my grandma was on council here in Grangeville, Idaho. So I spent some time here as a kid and always loved being in Idaho. As a kid, I was also just obsessed with learning and I was super curious. And so my parents bought me the World Book Encyclopedia. For those of you who've never seen one, it's sort of the precursor to Wikipedia. I'm similarly obsessed with Wikipedia today. And then they got me a globe. And so here I am on this journey of doing land use economics. And you'll see how all this knits together. And then I also worked in local government like you for about 20 plus years. And my last gig was long range planning director for the city of Minneapolis. So we did the Minneapolis 2040 plan, which might be familiar to you. So that's a little bit about me. As I said, I live in St. Paul now. And so let's kick it off. Let's talk about Post Falls. Post Falls today looks like this. The ubiquitous water tower, which I drove by 4 times this morning after saying to John and Bob, haven't seen the water tower yet. So then I went out and found it. But a city starts as something like this, right? And this probably looks familiar to you. It looks kind of like North Post Falls, kind of areas that are developing right now in the city. And what is a city? Well, a city is really something that human beings shape. So we could go to Mesopotamia and we'd see an ancient city that's like 3,000 or 4,000 years old. It would have the same human fingerprints on it that a city like Post Falls has, which is like 130 years old, right? So it doesn't really matter. It's all about human regulation of the landscape. We like to think about it more in agricultural terms, though, at Urban 3. So any of you grow up on a farm, or maybe you're just one generation off a farm? I mean, I am. And you know that when we talk about farming, when we talk about productivity of land, what we're really talking about is inputs per acre and outputs per acre. So we think about water per acre, fertilizer per acre, seed per acre, think about bales per acre or bushels per acre, right? So that's the sort of economic framework of how we think about land. So we said logic to land use and planning, right? And so this is an example from where I live today. Sorry, you got to watch out for that. And this is in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live. And the building on the right is the Osborne 370, formerly a corporate tower that was built by Ecolab. Ecolab makes a lot of cleaning products. They're an international cleaning products manufacturer. And the Roseville Walmart on the left is a little bit of a smaller Walmart, to be honest. It's about 19 acres. But we wanted to show you kind of how the land gets used and how productive that land is as a result of those regulatory inputs, right? So in this case, the Osborne 370 building is producing about $700,000 an acre in tax revenue and about 1,600 jobs per acre compared to the Walmart, which is relatively fewer jobs, quite a bit fewer jobs. So this might kind of seem like scary math, but trust me, I'm going to make it as palatable as I can. That's not my strong suit. One more analogy just to drive the point home. When we think about cars and we think about efficiency of vehicles, we don't talk about miles per tank, right? If we did, that Ford F-150 would win the race every time. I know from experience, having filled up my sister's 2 years ago when we were on a road trip out west, that vehicle is not particularly efficient. But if we think about it as miles per gallon, we know that little Ford Hybrid Escape is a very efficient vehicle, and it's a much more productive vehicle in terms of the number of miles that it gets. So we're miles per gallon, not miles per tank. and we're thinking about value per acre, okay? So we'll go to North Carolina for a minute. This is the home of Urban3, as I mentioned earlier. This is our hometown, the total taxable value for Buncombe County, which is actually where the word bunk comes from. If you're curious about that, if you've ever heard that word before to describe sort of fraud and abuse at the governmental level, Buncombe County is the sort of not proud owner of that terminology. And this has the Biltmore estate. Have any of you been to Biltmore? A lot of people who like to travel have been to Biltmore. Yeah, it sits on about 3,000 acres. It's the country's largest single-family home, and it is massive, right? And it's interesting. You can see it in this model. It's the purple, right? It's very, very prominent. That's the taxable value for Biltmore estate. But when you go to the value per acre, it disappears. And the reason is it's one use on a relatively large piece of land. It's just not that productive in terms of the property taxes that it pays. And it does still pay property tax. So it's unproductive parcel, especially when you compare that's downtown. You can see downtown very easily popping off the map there, the purple spike, okay? And Asheville's downtown is very modest. I'd say the tallest building in the downtown is probably 8 stories, but more typically there's somewhere in the 3 to 5 story range. It's not a very tall downtown, but it's a very productive downtown, and it pretty much carries Buncombe County. So now let's move on and let's come back to Idaho here. I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to start with your taxes because that's the most important revenue source for you as the local government. And in Idaho, like many parts of the country, and you can see it's like almost 2/3 of the country rely very heavily on property tax as a local government revenue source. So the things that you pay, the things that you provide to your community are paid for through the property tax. So let's kind of walk through how it works here in Idaho. So your tax system is relatively straightforward. It takes me 8 slides to show the tax system in Minnesota. It only takes me a couple to show it here, which is a good thing, trust me. And you've got the 3 different categories. You've got commercial, and then you have 2 residential categories. And like most states, you offer an exemption for homesteaded residential property. And in Idaho's case, it's about half. So you have about a 50% homestead exemption. And this is what it looks like then in the final roll-up. So this is what you're paying with a homestead on that $300,000 piece of property, okay? Which is probably a little low for Post Falls in terms of actual value, but that's just an example. The other thing you have that makes it a little bit unique, and we had to create this graphic to build a little bit greater understanding for the audience. You have this unique system of overlapping tax districts. So depending on where you are, where you live in the city of Post Falls, for instance, and even address by address, your tax bill could look quite a bit different than your neighbors because Kootenai County has over 45 different taxing districts just within your boundary. And this next slide kind of shows you how you'd anticipate seeing that tax bill. And this is how it breaks down. This is a general breakdown. So again, yours may look a little different depending on where you live, but generally speaking, about 38 cents of every tax dollar in Kootenai County goes to Post Falls. 17 cents goes to your fire and rescue, 21 cents goes to the county, and the rest is distributed amongst things like your school district and your college and highway funds and the library and such, okay? We also looked at your budget. Anybody here from finance? Pulling data, very helpful. And we looked at revenues and expenditures. Again, we're zeroing in on this property tax revenue source. And so we apply what's called a Sankey chart or a butterfly chart. And this just helps to understand as money flows into your revenue bucket, how does it flow out, okay? And so this is what we're going to look at for the next little bit of time here is your revenue for property tax. I will come back to a Sankey that'll show you where it flows out in your expenditures. And hopefully I'll get everything right. And if I don't, you'll correct me. All right. So this is your total assessed value. These are Kootenai County data that we obtained through the city and through your staff. And you can see on this map a big chunk of your land within Kootenai County is the Coeur d'Alene National Forest. Did I get the name right? Yeah, I think I did. But this is your Pay 2024 data. So this is your assessed value per acre. I'm just going to go back and show that to you again. So there's your total assessed value for the county as a whole. This is the assessed value per acre for Kootenai County as a whole. And you can see where you start to see productivity in the model is right in that Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene kind of corridor along the river, right? And then this is your downtown kind of popping off along with Coeur d'Alene. Coeur d'Alene is a little spikier, a little higher than Post Falls. And I want to kind of focus in on a couple of really productive parcels in this Kootenai County model. So let's kind of take a look at these. These are on Lake Coeur d'Alene. It's kind of funny. We call our team in Asheville started calling this lake effect. And I said, you guys don't really understand what lake effect is. Where I'm from, lake effect is like 20 inches of snow in a 24-hour period. This is more related to sort of the impact of having property on a lake. It's still kind of humorous though. So we call this the lake effect. In areas where you have property along a lake shore or riverfront, you tend to see very high value per acre, which just makes sense, right? Those properties are very expensive. You know this. They tend to be pretty compact because those parcels are finite. There's only so many parcels along a river or a lake. And these are just a couple I'm just going to call out for you here. The Lakeshore Lodge pulling 35 million per acre. And this one is what is that? I don't think it has a name. It's an address. Yeah, this is just an address at 9.2 million. So again, what's that?
Is that arrow point?
Is it? Okay. Yeah, I didn't have a label on it. Does this seem blurry to you all? A little blurry? Let me see if I can. Is that better? Okay. All right. So then let's look at your total assessed value for the city. So this is Post Falls, the entire city. That's your total assessed value. You can see you've got some higher value parcels. When you go to value per acre, those kind of disappear. But then if we go into the 3D model, you can see that River's Edge, 371 Lofts, and the private home that's on the river, we'll come back to those in a little bit. Those are your highest producing parcels in terms of revenue generation per acre. Let me walk you through this productivity ratio. So a couple of years ago, we were talking with, I think one of the first cities we did this for was Rancho Cucamonga, Florida. California. There we go. We also do a lot of work in Florida. What day is this? Anyway, and we said, like it would be helpful if you could understand the productivity issue in sort of numbers, right? So we established this math basically where we take the value of a city and divide it by the value of the county it's in, and then take the acres that are taxable in that city and divide them by the acres within the county. And this is what you come up with. You come up with a ratio of productivity, city to county. So that's basically all this is. It's like, what, fourth grade math? It's pretty easy. So I told you it wouldn't be that scary. This is the productivity for Post Falls compared to Kootenai County. So I'm just going to walk through these quickly. Post Falls taxable value is 8.6 times greater than the amount of county area that it takes up. That's a very healthy number. We want to see that 6 or better. Okay, so that's really good. And this is Coeur d'Alene. So Coeur d'Alene is 13.6 times. You'd expect that, right? Coeur d'Alene, a little older, a little denser, a little bit more developed, right? And your staff asked us to use Coeur d'Alene as a comparison. We didn't just do that. We asked for that first. Because sometimes that's sensitivity, right? You don't want to be pitted against them. Downtown Post Falls taxable value is about 12.9 times greater than the amount of county area it takes up. So again, we would expect to see your downtown being very productive. But this is the one where we think you've got some opportunity, you've got some runway here, right? Because that's downtown to the city, 1.5. And again, we want to see that better than 6. So that's just generally what's happening in Post Falls. You've got lots of runway there to do higher, more productive uses in your downtown. The other thing we always look at for a city is how much of your land is exempt. And so in the case of Post Falls, about 44% of Kootenai County is exempt. And a lot of that is your federal national forest, your federally owned forest there to the east. Your downtown, about 20% of it is exempt. My city where I live is 44% exempt in the downtown. So, but it's also a capital city, so there's some variation there. But I think 20 is a pretty reasonable number for a city the size of Post Falls. And again, consistent with what we've seen across those 47 states that we've worked in. This is downtown. So this is exemption within your downtown. And I'd say, you've got a couple, I hope you can read that. You've got a couple of schools downtown. You've got the Boys and Girls Club. You've got the City Hall. Again, pretty typical uses in a downtown that are exempt. So now we're going to jump into some of the parcel level analysis we did for Post Falls. And I'm going to start by showing you this slide because I think this is helpful as you think about parking and the impact that parking regulation has on your values, on your value per acre in particular. So this could be a big box anywhere in the US. It's about a 22 acre site. It's got a fairly consistent footprint. It could be a Costco, it could be a Home Depot, Walmart, Target, whatever. And it pulls about $1 million per acre in value. Well, what if we put a little bit more parking on it? Okay, we're going to start to dilute the value, right, down to about 700,000. If we take 11 acres of parking off the original parcel, we double the value of the site. So it's pretty significant change, yeah. And I mean, what's that?
Makes sense why we have no parking.
Right, well, that's an interesting question. We're gonna come back to that because you'll see where this can be kind of, I'm gonna show a couple examples where this is pretty, it's pretty significant in terms of the impact. But I will say this, like when you shop on Black Friday, are those outlots full? Are those further out spaces? It's rare anymore, I think, that those spaces are filled up. So I live 5 blocks from a Target and yeah, go ahead.
Why?
Oh, no. No, I'm not saying parking is not valuable. It is taxed at a much lower rate, and it is usually a less productive value, though, in value, not in terms of its importance, but value in economic terms, in terms of what it lends to the city in terms of revenue. So that's the main difference. In some jurisdictions, they assess it at the same level. In most, they do not. But it's more about the number of acres that are dedicated to parking versus a building. And buildings being more productive use on a site. Yeah. I think you'll see this a couple more times in the deck. And hopefully I will get a little clearer about it. If I don't, let's go back to it, okay? Great. Here's another example. This is your Walmart. You've got 2 of them here that we put in the model, the one on Point Parkway and the one on Milan. And that's the Walmart example. And I went too fast. Let me just say this, pulling about 900,000 per acre on the Walmart could be a Target, Home Depot. We use Walmarts because they tend to be very consistent across the country in terms of their land use and their building footprint. And so they're a good benchmarking tool for us. So we use Walmarts a lot for that reason. We're going to look at residential uses within your model. And I'm going to start by kind of a little bit of an explainer slide here around what is missing middle housing. And this is a residential typologies that Opticos did. And they define the gentle density as kind of duplex to fourplex. And the medium density is something a little higher, like row homes, townhomes. You have a lot of these medium density products in Post Falls. As I was driving around last night, I saw a lot of these that are kind of shared wall, sort of 8 to 10 units and larger. But what you're missing, and a lot of American cities are missing, is that gentle density. You've got a fair number of duplexes, but there isn't a lot of variation in that sort of gentle density category. And that's because a lot of cities after World War II created zoning regulations that didn't allow for that kind of construction. And so a lot of American cities kind of got kind of frozen in amber when it came to different types of land uses. And so what you tend to see in American cities is a lot of single family and a lot of multifamily, but that in between is kind of missing. But we did find some examples in your model. I'm going to start with the single family. So you've got a range here from about 1.5 million up to 2.4 million on your single family uses. And John and Bob and I were talking about this earlier, but these are, 50 to 60 foot lots. Minimum buildable is 6,500. Did I remember that correctly? So, you're kind of in the sweet spot for American cities. I've seen as high as 12,000 square feet minimum buildable. I've seen as low as where I live, which is 4,800 square feet minimum buildable. So there's a big range across the country. But that's kind of a typical range there. And then you're missing middle. Most of these are duplexes. There is a 4 in there, and there is a cottage court. The upper right one is a cottage court. So cottage court is where you take maybe you do a lot combination, but you take like 1 or 2 lots and you create a small sort of grouping of cottages on it. Y'all familiar with that? It's kind of a newer, it's actually a very old building type, but it's kind of newer in the context of modern zoning. And then your multifamily, which is strong. So between 2 and 3.6 million. This is the roll up for your residential model and how productive they are. Again, you're missing middle. It's the most productive. You also have the least of it. So this is an area where you could do more of that and it would be more productive for you in terms of tax revenue generation. In Post Falls, your peak parcels are all residential. This is unusual. Usually in an American city, we would expect to see a combination of residential and commercial uses in peak parcels. So these are the most productive or highest value per acre parcels in your model. But in Post Falls, they're all residential. And 371 Lofts, back to you. This is the one that I think you were alluding to. 371 Lofts in the middle, which has very limited off-street parking. Yeah. And the condos at River's Edge Marina, 16.5 million, and Riverfront single family home. That one, we don't have a name on that home, but it's on the river. And it is one of the most valuable. But let's dig into this. This will answer your question. So, and I might ask Bob or John, I think John can give us a little bit of background on your smart code. But these are just a comparison of Sawtooth Flats and then the 371 Lofts. And you can see how much more financially productive 371 Lofts is, but it's primarily because it is has very little parking off street. And the one on the left, the Sawtooth Flats, has quite a bit more parking and actually has some what I call those, like a carport kind of situation. So you can see the significant, about 3 times the value between those 2 parcels, but that's primarily because of the very strong regulation on parking that occurred. Do you want to say anything else about that?
I can just say that the one on the right, that one there was how smart code was originally adopted and intended. The role of smart code was in your city center to maximize taxable value to offset some of the other urban liabilities that may occur. But upon installation of that, it relied about 100% of its parking roughly on street, which then created a little bit of a nuance because we don't have a lot of downtown parking in the downtown yet. So we changed the regulation and we added that up to no more than 25% of the required parking can be credited on street, which then we deferred a lot more of the required parking to be on site, which then you can see that what culminated was that reduction in the revenue that you could get or the efficiency you could potentially get out of that same lot. So it's just looking at compromises. Regulations can impact the financial sustainability of the community. And that's just kind of an example of that. Especially if you want to create more larger lots on the periphery. If you want to have a large 1 acre or half acre lots, then you could sometimes offset that by having more efficiency in a different area.
Yeah. So it's about achieving a balance. So you probably aren't going to do a lot of things like the one on the right in the future. You might do things that are a little bit more like the one on the left. And I would suggest to you that the option that you have is to think about that from a balancing standpoint. So how much off-street parking are you requiring? And what does that do to the value of the parcel? So you could probably do a little less parking on the left, but not as little as the one on the right, right? So it's finding that middle ground, right?
But this doesn't make sense. They're relying on people to come to the city and spend money where they're gonna park.
Well, you're
Uh,
hoping that people that live there leave and go to a day job somewhere else, or they walk to the job somewhere
Right,
else.
but when you have 18 parking spaces for 3 stories of apartments, how's that even work?
Then they have to go park in front of somebody else's house.
Yeah, I mean, City Hall's gonna be riddled with cars. Yeah, that's not parking.
So again, it's really about balance. So if it's not working, that's good. That's important data. Come back to it, fix it for the next time, right? All right. So let's look at neighborhood comparisons. This is just two neighborhoods. These are not very far from each other. The first is Cascade Court and the second is Travis Court. But they're miles apart in terms of their productivity. Travis Court is a much more productive neighborhood. Do you have familiarity with these, you know where these are? Like you can kind of picture where these are. Oh, was it? Okay. Cascade Court. All right. So this is what they look like in terms of their value per acre. Is that your house? Oh, that's funny. This does happen from time to time, and I can tell you, it's always like, did we pick the right one? Did we pick? Yeah. Apparently, we knew you were going to be in the room. That's always hilarious when this happens. I'm sure Andrew's watching right now and laughing. So really quickly, I just want to show you the two compared side by side. Now, the big difference between these two neighborhoods is lot size. And Travis Court is a much smaller lot size, and there's 32 parcels compared to 11 on the left. So it's a pretty significant difference, right? And it's 3 times more productive. The math is really easy here. It's 3 times more parcels, 3 times more productive, right? But if we looked at Cascade Court and Travis Court, and these are both single-family residential neighborhoods, okay? What if you had built Travis Court on Cascade Court? What if you had developed Cascade Court like you did Travis? Well, this is what it would look like. Significant revenue for the city, significantly more revenue for the city. And when we get into discussing infrastructure in a minute, this is where this is going to become pretty obvious. We got asked in Sugar Land, Texas, if there was an impact on single family values. So the value of your single family home, if it was adjacent to a multifamily home. We were super curious about that. So we dug into Sugar Land's data, and this is what we found. There was no appreciable difference between a single family average within the city of Sugar Land and a city or a single family home that's adjacent to multifamily. So there's no difference. There's no value impact on a single family home by its adjacency to multifamily. This is your mall, Silver Lake Mall. It pulls about 1.2 million per acre. I would say generally in the United States, this is a healthy mall. We have seen as little as 100,000 per acre. Genesee Valley Mall in Flint, Michigan was pulling 100. We model a lot of malls across the country. And I wanted to show you this one because this is the OG, this is the granddaddy. This is Southdale Mall in Edina, Minnesota, the first indoor mall in the United States. And we just happened to do the Hennepin County model for Minneapolis and Hennepin County. And again, just an illustration of thinking differently about parking. Southdale has a lot of parking. It has surface parking, it has structured parking. And so the city of Edina probably, well, when I was working for them, actually, we changed how these outlots were zoned. And we allowed Southdale, the owners of Southdale, to upzone these areas. So we made them more permissible. And what happened was they developed the outlots. And those outlots today have increased the value per acre for that mall by about $1 million. And that's the first cut. There's many more outlots to be developed at Southdale. Just an example of what you can do with a mall. Malls are really tricky. Malls tend to be very lagging in terms of the revenue generation in most American markets because people's shopping habits have changed so much. I mean, I give you an example. I was looking for an item a couple of weeks ago, and I go up to Southdale's cousin called Rosedale. They're all called Dales. No idea why. And I'm looking for this item, and I can't find it. And I'm literally standing in Macy's looking for this item, and I'm like, so I just pulled out my phone and found it on Amazon. and ordered it while I was standing in the store, which is stupid. But still, here we are, because that's just how we think about it now. If we can't put our hands on it today and it can be delivered tonight, we will probably do that, right? That's how human beings are sort of oriented now. This is a little bit of your large scale commercial. So these are kind of your, Lowe's, Riverbend Place, the Plaza, Ziggy's. These are large lot, large scale commercial uses, pulling anywhere from 400,000 to a 1.8 million. Your medium scale commercial. So there's a lot of this in Post Falls. I call this auto oriented, where you pull in and you park in front of the store and walk in, right? This is very common in American cities. This is pulling 2.4 million per acre. Your small scale, this is almost always one of the most productive uses in a city, is these little onesie twosie mom and pop stores, right? And you've got the Frontier Grocery and Huckleberry Thicket. What is Huckleberry Thicket? I mean, it sounds charming, but what is it? Is it a restaurant?
No, it's like a camp store.
Oh, okay. All right. Good to know. And the White House Grill, the Bunker Bar, those are all doing really well. And this is the roll up. So your big box, the least valuable, not surprising again, it's that parking dilution, right? That's what's happening with those parcels. And your small scale, the most productive, 1.5 million. Your mixed use, so we looked at Coeur d'Alene for these because y'all don't have very much mixed use in Post Falls. So we wanted to see what would that look like in your region, sort of in your area. And so we pulled this one. This is Atlas Mill. We just used a couple of these. This is yours, the Promenade in Post Falls. The next one is the Village at Riverstone in Coeur d'Alene. So those are just a couple examples. I'll go back as I went through those quickly. This one's about 5 million. The Promenade, 5.8 million, and the Village at Riverstone is 17.2 million. And this is your lasting value parcel. This is the Jacqueline Arts and Cultural Center. It's built in 1890 and still pulling 2.6 million per acre. So still very much a valuable parcel for Post Falls. And this is just a roll up of lower to higher density residential, commercial, and mixed use. And again, we have the Coeur d'Alene examples in here for mixed use because you just only have the one so far. All right. So I wanted to show you this. Is kind of interesting. So one of the things that happened in Post Falls was between the 1930s and 1970s, you de-annexed property. You all know that story, or you've heard about this? So you kind of started out as a much larger city, and in the 1950s, you decided you were going to de-annex some property and kind of shrink down the boundaries of the city, which was a really smart thing to do because that was right on the eve of the interstate highway system. And highways drove a lot of growth in cities, sometimes in ways that were not very well controlled. And so you de-annexed all that property, and that was in 1964. And you can see what happened to your population. So between the time you started de-annexing property and about 1980, you had kind of a slow, gradual growth. And then after that, you just shot up. So this is demographically what happens in Post Falls between about 1980 and today. In Kootenai County, the same thing happened. It's a little more precipitous if you're the county. And if you're Coeur d'Alene, similarly. And this is just a 1975 article about the freeway coming through. And we were talking this morning about the impact of the freeway. And of course, there's two major freeway building eras in the United States, immediately after World War II, and then in the 1970s. And so a lot of Western freeway systems get built in the 70s, and they have a significant impact on cities because they drive growth, sometimes in a way that's not very manageable. And John was saying earlier that IDOT actually wanted to put in more off-ramps, more actual exits off of the freeway, but the city said, no, we don't want to grow that fast. So let's kind of keep our foot on the brake a little bit here. That's a really interesting story because you can really see that today in how Post Falls has developed over time. And you can also see it how Post Falls has developed in comparison to Coeur d'Alene. So Post Falls is not as productive as a downtown right now. You certainly have the capacity to get there, but when we're looking at the two cities, Coeur d'Alene is pulling a little bit more AVP. And these are just a quick roll up of some Monopoly cards, just showing you some parcels within the two cities side by side. So you can kind of see that. All right, now back to the fiscal review. So this is the Sankey chart I promised you earlier. Again, we've got our revenues coming in on the left, expenditures on the right. You can see that a lot of your expenditures for infrastructure, and that's what we're going to jump into next, are either intergovernmental for your roads. So that means it comes from the state or the federal government, or it's fee-based for things like your water and sewer systems, okay? So this is just to tether us to where the money comes in and where it goes out. And the government finance officers will tell you that these things on the left are assets. The truck you drove in to get here today, your laptop computer, this building, these are all assets, right? They will tell you that roads and tanks and pipes are also assets, but we beg to differ, because if those were assets, you could pick them up and sell them to Grangeville, but you can't do that, can you? Can't pick up that road and sell it to Coeur d'Alene. Maybe you can pick up the water tank. I've seen that done, but that's even a little bit of a lift, right? Haha, no pun intended. So one of the things we look at is life cycle cost. When we think about return on investment and we think about the cost of infrastructure, we really want to know, what is the life cycle cost of that infrastructure? What does it cost us to repair or to rebuild that road, put in brand new pipe, build a new water tank? And I saw you got a brand new one up in the north. That's a big one. And so how long will that infrastructure last, and what will it cost to maintain and replace it? Now, you're sitting kind of in a part of the city that has a lot of legacy infrastructure right here. So these roads are older. They're probably, the base of these roads is 100 years or older, right? And the pipes under those roads are much older. And your historic water tank, right? That's not the kind of water tank you're going to build in the future. So these are older assets that you've paid for multiple times, because when we think about streets in particular, we're really thinking about, what are those sort of geographically or geospatially relevant costs, right? And we took your Public Works Department's pavement condition index data. And this is where we look at sort of over time, what happens to a road. Well, if you maintain a road in very good condition through your PCI, it's likely you're spending much less money because you're doing preventative maintenance, right? You're out filling potholes, you're crack sealing, seal coating, you're putting in curbs, that kind of thing. You're going to spend a lot less money over time. If you let that infrastructure degrade, you're going to spend a lot more money on things like a full reconstruction, okay? And this is just for your current infrastructure. This is not new infrastructure. This is not infrastructure you will put in to support development, okay? So we like to show this kind of road maintenance scenario, and there's really two ways you can go about this. One is reactive. You let it get kind of in bad shape and then you go in and do something really significant, right? You do like a full rebuild, or you do a mill and overlay, right? Or you can do a proactive approach, which is where you kind of keep that pavement at a pretty consistent level of service, very good to excellent, right? So that means you're doing all kinds of preventative maintenance all the time. Every jurisdiction I ever worked for, we were absolutely religious about crack seal, seal coat, crack seal, seal coat. Every single year we did a project. Every 5 years we were crack sealing and seal coating the entire city. And that really helped us because we had to rebuild roads a lot less frequently. And you can see that that ends up costing you a lot less money too. You save about $3 million a year if you do preventative maintenance. It also happens to keep you all employed, which is excellent. So we also looked at your PCI in terms of the centerline data. So you got about 197 centerline miles in your PCI, and it's very good right now. The only problem with this is, since so much of your system is in really good shape today, it means that it's all going to go bad at the same time. Okay. So that's just something for you to think about in terms of those life cycle costs. And when you do capital planning, that's really crucial. So we also wanted to model for you what a road rebuild schedule would look like. You're in a snowy climate, you're in the mountains, you've got some freeze and thaw here, you've got fairly heavy vehicles moving on your roads, right? There's a lot of wear and tear to your roads. And so we did this rebuild schedule, and you're right here right now, okay? And living here in 2025, 26, you're building new roads to the north, right? But you're maintaining what you have here, and you're in the process of replacing roads that were built in the 1970s. So at about the same time your freeway came through. And So every time you get into this road rebuild schedule, you're on the cusp of another one. I always liken it to painting a bridge. You get to one end and you have to start over and paint it again, right? In the opposite direction. So in your third rebuild cycle, you're compounding those costs, right? Because you're already in the first two cycles and you're not quite through them. And if you don't keep up with that, you just end up being behind the eight ball, right? And that's the challenge because a road is forever. You don't get to take it out. Cities find this out the hard way. Detroit pulled their city boundaries back because of massive population loss, and those roads are still sitting there. And so that's what you have to remember. Once you put that road in, you have to serve it, and you have to do the maintenance on it to keep it in good shape. So this is what we call a spaghetti map. We're just showing you your infrastructure, water, sewer, stormwater, and transportation. And this is all of it. This is 541 lane miles. And this could just, we like this because it's a good example of how much infrastructure you own. You can go to Coeur d'Alene on your stormwater. You can go down to Alberton, on your water, down to Drummond on your sewer, and all the way to Elliston, Montana on your roads. It's not the worst I've ever seen, by the way. Springfield can go all the way from Phoenix to St. Louis on their roads, just to give you an idea of that. This is just the infrastructure you have today. So this is what we modeled that's in your PCI. This is not new future infrastructure. So I just want to, I'll say that a couple of times. What I'm going to show you now is this is not for new development. This is what you have today existing, okay? So let's walk through this. I went kind of fast through that. That's your transportation. Now, right now, you don't have a dedicated source for transportation funding. So you have intergovernmental aids, you have some general fund revenue that you're devoting to transportation. But unlike your water and your sewer, you don't have an enterprise fund set up for it. Now, it's not unusual to see enterprise funds for transportation, but it's a little trickier, and we can get into that and nerd out about that if you want to. So that's your transportation. This is your water, 140 miles. Because it's an enterprise fund, you can see that you evaluate the condition of that every so often, and your numbers are very close together here between your current and needed spending in our estimation of your life cycle cost. Okay, again, this is not based on any capital planning you've done, and your enterprise funds are in very good shape. This is not to any way call those into question. It's just a matter of us saying, we think the life cycle cost is X. You have a capital plan for Y. The same applies to sewer, again, an enterprise fund. You're looking at those assets every few years, and you very much understand what's happening there. And your storm sewer, you're underspending on storm sewer, but again, I think this is an example of where cities have to make that call. And so it's not unusual for us to see this. And stormwater, storm sewer systems are notoriously difficult to predict, because we used to say, oh, it's a 100-year event. And now we have a 100-year event every 5 years. So predicting our capacity for these systems can be really challenging. I know that from experience. Again, this is just today, the development that you have in place, not future development. And I think this is the kind of helpful sort of wayfinding to this conversation around fee increases, right? So for your enterprise funds, if you're not increasing your fees on a regular basis, you're probably not keeping up with the needed spending that you have in the system. And this is what the roll-up looks like. And again, I would say this is typical for any city in America. Most cities are underspending on infrastructure fairly significantly, and yours is not the highest I've seen. So this is the last piece of analysis we did for everybody here in Post Falls, this return on investment analysis. We looked at your budget, we looked at this water reclamation facility study, and we looked at the water system master plan to take our data. And we have a fiscal analyst who was a budget analyst for Largo, Florida, and she digs into these documents and pulls together all of the, working with our analysts, pulls together all the spatial data that we present here. So this was the scope of the analysis. We looked at, again, stormwater, sewer, water, and transportation. This is just for what you currently have. And then we spatialize those costs across the city, which is GIS speak for, we put it on a map, okay? And this is what it looks like revenues per acre. So this is your back to your parcel data for your value per acre. So this is what these parcels are producing in terms of their productivity. And this is what it should be spending based on the life cycle cost. And this is kind of turned on its side, so you can kind of see the two things playing off of each other. And those are revenues and costs per acre. Your net position is about minus 36 million going forward, and it's comparing your land area to the full city. And you can see in this model which areas of the city are net positive. So there's some parts of the city that are carrying their own weight. The parcels themselves are productive enough that they offset the cost for infrastructure and maintenance, right? But most of the city is not. And again, this is very typical in American cities. And this is just an example of one where we've got this little tiny parcel, this little coffee shop that's very productive. And then we've got the River's Edge Marina and the promenade. So the city's biggest opportunity, in our estimation, is to increase that net return on investment, right? You've got lots of infrastructure you're not leveraging, and you've got this ability to use your land more intensely so that it's more productive for you and helps you to offset those longer term infrastructure costs so that you can actually pay for all the roads and water and pipe that you've put in. This is net for the city. So this is return on investment net, examples by building type. Not surprisingly, that higher density residential and the promenade, your mixed use building, are the most productive, and they are netting out, right? So those are in the black, everything else is in the red. Then we were asked to do some growth projections. So based on all of that parcel level data that we gathered and the infrastructure data, these are the building footprints of your city over time. But up to 1975, you didn't grow very much. You de-annexed all that property in 1964, and you kind of parked yourselves for a while. And that's what you looked like in 1975. And then you added a significant amount of land to the city. And that's what you're developing today, is all of the yellow to the north there and out to the west. So these are building footprints that we imposed, the darker brown parcels that you see. And the land in yellow is what you've annexed since 1975. And like a lot of American cities, you grew very quickly in that period, especially Western cities, we see this in. And that's the land you plan to expand into in the future. This is in that area you've annexed since 1975. It's 4.7 times bigger than the land area in 1975 in the green. So that's how much you grew. And this is what the average year built looks like, 1986 versus 2008 is an average year built for this model. So most of your development in the green is right around 1986, and most of your development in the yellow is 2008. 2008, of course, is the last housing bubble, right? This is the major economic downturn we all suffered. So we took that data and we wanted to see what we could do with 3 scenarios based on this land use portfolio. Your planning department generated this for us. And these were the inputs we looked at. So added commercial, added residential. And then we wanted to know how many dwelling units per acre would that yield and how many parcels acreage would it take up. So again, we're trying to analyze with the land you have today, which is a finite resource, unless you keep annexing, what would this look like? So this is scenario number 1. And they show the additional square feet or added residential units for each development scenario and how those produce revenues or costs. So scenario number 1 is added commercial square feet is 7.9 million and 6,400 additional residential units. It does not net out, okay? The second one is 9.2 million in additional square feet and 15,900 residential units. You get to a net zero on that particular scenario. So that's just breaking even. And then on scenario 3, it's actually net positive. It's 9.2 million commercial square feet again, but we added another 2,000 or so residential units. I know that's kind of small print, sorry about that. And then each of these are adding mixed-use cores in each redevelopment area. So again, you really want to capture that mixed use because it's very productive, which is typically in a lot of markets, mixed use is going to be a sort of commercial level with housing above it. That's a very typical mixed use kind of typology. This is what they look like for the roll up. These are the growth projections. And we just asked this question, what would it take to break even? And that's what was driving this. You'll see a little bit more about this tomorrow with SCJ. They've got some boards that we worked with them on. I think this is kind of an interesting exercise to go through. So while you're building new infrastructure out to the north, right, in those development areas, north and west, we also wanted to look at what happens if you can leverage the existing infrastructure, like all this infrastructure right around us. What if you can leverage that to do something that's a little more productive, a little bit more intense, right? So this is your current situation, right? Your net position of minus 36 million in terms of lifetime costs. So again, I want to make sure we're not mixing metaphors here. We're talking about life cycle, not your capital, right? So what if you did a hypothetical scenario where you did just 23 more acres of mixed use development in the city as a whole, right? Just in the downtown, excuse me. And you did the growth scenario 3 that I showed you earlier. And that's where we can see you netting out, right? You're positive here. You're balanced, right? And these were some of the examples we used in your model. These are real examples from Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene. So one of the challenges you have going forward is what is mixed use going to look like for Post Falls? What do you want it to look like, right? But that's your big area of opportunity. And this is the difference it can make in terms of where you sit today at 1.5 times for the city, downtown versus the city. You could be at 6 times and be producing about 3.3 billion in value per acre for the city as a whole. Not a big shift, not a big change. It's fairly incremental. It's kind of a very gentle kind of way of going about it. This is Mansfield, Texas, which we wanted to show you because Mansfield came to us, probably 5 or 6 years ago and said, we really want to grow our core. How can we do that? And we just did some scenario modeling for them like we did for you. And they went from 1.4 times in 2020 to 1.8 times in 24. And that was their value difference. So pretty significant and pretty little sort of input, a small input, right? And this is what their value per acre comparison looks like for Mansfield today. So they added about $3 billion in total value growth, excuse me, and new construction was about 2 billion of that. So that's where Mansfield stands today. And they're on a very steep growth trajectory, just like Post Falls is.
So other than money, what is the benefit of building the city so large?
Other than what?
Other than billions of dollars extra by having multi-use.
Oh, you already have a city that's very large. You're not building a city that's very large.
13.2, yeah, it's great, you got a bunch more money, but what does that do to the quality of life of the people that live in that city? I'm just curious.
You already have a large city that you're not cash flowing. I don't have an opinion about the size of the city. Mansfield made a decision to be that size.
I'm not talking about that, I'm just asking a question about what benefit does billions more dollars bring to people in the city? That's all I'm asking.
All I'm saying is that the value of increasing the productivity of your land is that you can afford to have a city that large. You can decide to have a smaller city. That's an option you have. Yeah, you can have a smaller city.
Comes down to options. So like we talked about some of the cost of infrastructure, the life cycle, the average home built after 1975 being 2008 is a little bit of a liability because along with that, there are all those roads and infrastructure that built that newer growth. So eventually the replacement costs and all that, taxpayers or local citizens will have to pay those costs down the road. So you come up with a plan. How do you deal with some of the long-term costs down the road? And do we want to deal with it or do we not? And so
Do we benefit from more property taxes since there's more properties to tax at this point?
You won't keep
I mean,
up. Yeah,
why
you,
does the tax rate not continue to go up when there's more homes than ever been built? Is that not more productivity as far as
no,
tax income goes?
it's
Because
not.
properties to tax.
So
Single,
if you look at the three scenarios, the purpose of the three scenarios was. If we keep growing like we do, the same mindset that the things we like, I like looking at this, and so let's building more of what we like. That's what scenario one was, what is the long-term cost? Okay, that's what we like, and what is that? And the only reason why we did that was to give options. At the end of the day, you know, that's what our role is to provide options. We'll go through the public process and council can go whatever direction they want to go in. But we're just trying to provide information when we do the future land use planning for the comp plan, what direction. So that's that scenario one.
Mhm.
Scenario two was like, okay, how do we mitigate some of it? How do we, you know, when we get these annexations, we just, is there an educated path we could take to make it more fiscally sustainable in our comprehensive plan, so the liabilities are less if we choose to grow in that area? Because odds are, you're gonna keep getting asked, you're gonna keep getting asked, you're gonna keep getting asked, and you're gonna get scenario one. It's whether it happens by 2035 or 2055, that's what will happen. Unless you augment it through some sort of policy and direction and do it more thoughtful, that's what scenario two looked at, is like, how do we, now you have scenario three, like, how do we get neutral, how do we get positive, what does that look like? Not saying you're gonna go down that path, but what would it take? And so that's what scenario looked at. I'm not saying I live in Post Falls, I'm not saying I like scenario three either. It's just, that's what the models are showing to be more fiscally sustainable.
so the way I would explain it is, you know, like if you're nearing retirement, put all of your dollars in a high risk stock, hoping that you get good return on that investment, or would you shelter some of that, right? And so one of the challenges you have as a city is that you have a large growth area. You don't have anything there yet, but the market wants to put things there. And how you regulate how those products get built is important, because some will be productive and some will be unproductive. Some will be high risk AI stock and some will be government bonds. So you have to decide the path that you're going to be on. Yep.
So all of us that the postcard will be fiscally responsible for the structure in my school, because that's for my streets to be paid, extension to be paid. No one's does, which I think is part of what is trying to be explained. So the question I have, do we have to like say start figuring out ways to increase taxes so that we can get money in the next 20 years if we not started doing them, or do we look at these specific places in the city of Bristol where as residents we can tolerate a little bit more building or development and not real that will help generate more money than what that specific parcel that we're trying to develop really needs for their own infrastructure. So like if we built in downtown, they use buildings like schools and in for ideally, they will pay more taxes than to keep up their infrastructure. So that additional money that they generate for the city can actually help pave the street from our houses that our civilian users don't generate. And so that will benefit current residents of the city. So that's the how much can we tolerate to help set the cost of where we live, like without changing the character of the city. And that I answer the question, and we have to say we here right? And so I think ideally that's where do we ask the permit to be so that we can come up with facts and see what we houses that we believe.
And I think, yeah, thank you, Councilmember. I will just say that I'm gonna wrap up here, but I'll illustrate that point here. You can you can think about this in terms of this slide, which we showed earlier, how much more productive that parcel that has less parking is. You can also look at it in the Cascade Court versus Travis Court example, right? These are smaller lots, they use less infrastructure, they're generating more revenue for the city. To your point, single-family homes in the United States do not pay their way. My single-family home that I live in St. Paul does not pay its way. My taxes are over $8,000 a year now. I am still not allowing the city to break even on my parcel for the services that I use. Okay, that's me. I'm not making a judgment about whether that's good or bad. That just is. The data is just there, right? And do I think my taxes are slightly exorbitant? Yes, I do, just for the record, because they have almost tripled in the time I've owned my home. But the alternative is that the city, my city, could have been doing denser development in certain areas that would support it, and I would have a lower tax bill. That's the reality, but they didn't. So here we are. So that's where the opportunity you have is to build or grow that purple mountain that you have. And you've got lots of opportunities that don't have necessarily negative impacts on residents because they're in areas where you have infrastructure in the ground. You can leverage that and you can build amenities that people actually want. So there are some opportunities there. Just using this example again of Post Falls today and what could be conceptually in the future. And then just understanding what are your costs. So the big thing that I think you just called out and emphasized is that it will cost you a certain amount of money to provide services to these users of land within your city. And will they be paying their way or not? And the reality is most of them are not. You can see on this one, most of your parcels, whether they're lower density single family up to lower density commercial and medium density commercial, those are not paying their way. Those are all net negative for the city right now. And this is pretty typical throughout the United States. We see this everywhere. This is not unique to Post Falls. So you have an opportunity to really diversify this portfolio. Think differently about how you're regulating land use into the future so that the city is more economically sustainable. Because the reality for cities right now is that the feds are pulling back on funding. States are not funding you as much as they used to. And so having the ability to be dependent on yourselves is going to be increasingly important. Know your intake, right? You're not going to eat potato chips every meal. I mean, if I would, but yeah, I shouldn't. And then consider the spatial consequences, right? So if you spread out, it's going to cost you more money. You're annexing property, you're spreading out to the west and to the north. The market is driving that. People want that. That's great. You just have to rebalance your portfolio from time to time. You can do those things. You just have to rebalance the portfolio and make sure that you're in a positive net position. And you do that by replicating productive things within your land use model. And this example is from Hutchinson, Kansas, which we just did. But these two neighborhoods, which are both single family neighborhoods, Kissawa Village is just a little bit more densely popular or densely developed, and it's about twice the productivity of 36th Avenue. These are relatively small inputs, but they have big impact, right? So again, we're not talking about abandoning single family. We're saying when you build single family, build it a little smarter, build it in a more economically sustainable way. And this is a great illustration of that. This is a typical cul-de-sac. Americans love their cul-de-sacs, but they are very expensive. This one costs about $125,000 per acre to maintain for the city. But if you build it on a grid style, you can do it for $78,000 a year. Again, this is just data. It's just your numbers. It's just your budget. It's showing true cost. So you can build in different ways and get the same exact product. Okay. If you haven't, I'm almost done. I'm going to finish and then you can go. And if you haven't read Strong Towns, highly recommend you read it. It's a great book and invite you to do the math. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes. Yeah.
I think I want a few people that's not a city employee or government employee here who's looking around and ask questions.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested in how things are gonna go forward in the city that I love and live in. We have lived in for years. What's almost alarming to me, I appreciate the fact that you open this up to people who just live here because this almost would be considered something that should be discussed without the public. Because it's almost alarming that I never heard balance or quality of life in anything. I live in one of the cash cows that you displayed up there that is overfunding, I guess, for the size of it. And, you know, my life savings is basically in that, and to reward that, we're getting 5 apartment buildings built right across the street from us. And so, which I know you said in Sugar Land, Texas, they love apartments next to neighborhoods.
No, what I said was multifamily next to single family does not have an
In
impact on
Sugar Land,
value.
Texas, correct. It is what I heard, right? And then as we talk about lack of parking, because with those, I worry about the cars that will eventually be down the street and, you know, over here and, the problems that can occur. Years ago, we did Post Falls days that showed how the area right here was gonna be the diamond of Post Falls and on the river, and we got the brewery, and we've got all the great restaurants and all the great facilities there, which we all love and we all use. And we talked about how it was going to be, you know, we were going to build buildings, move forward, and this was our vision. And then several of my neighbors, we got the plans for the apartment buildings, and they're gonna be 4-story, no elevator, vinyl sided, and you know, I haven't seen the parking as far as that's gonna go, as far as that, but as I see moving forward, we're relying on people to be working, to create parking for some scenarios. With my life savings stuck into one of the cash cows that was up there, it's alarming to me. And like you said, you know, you talked about, would you rather do business here, put your money into here? Well, that's the way we look at it. If we have our money into these, this is, and then all of a sudden, what you were sold is gonna happen, it's changed, you know, and it's just, and the quality of life that, and I understand there has to be a balance, but when you talk about, you know, decreasing parking, that reminds me of when I go visit relatives that are in California and Seattle, and I have relatives all over the West Coast. And where you can't find parking and those kinds of things, it's, you know, it just goes to the quality of life. But thank you for the time. That's just, I'm not an employee. We just wanted you to just get feedback from somebody that lives and loves this place.
You had a question.
Let's chat after.
It's like what you were talking about, I understand, you buy the cul-de-sacs to live in. For safety for our kids, I would say 90% of the time, am I not correct? And to see everything go away from that and just go get onto your, what did you call the square?
A grid
Grid.
system?
Go on the grid. It just makes me sad, kinda.
You can have
kind of
both.
like I guess we don't, I guess we could decide to buy our house.
Yeah.
But we wanna see our whole city of Post Falls look. I know
I don't, I'm not,
I know you're not applying for anything.
oh,
you're
no,
just bringing it
no,
up.
I was just gonna say, I'm not suggesting one's good or bad.
Yeah.
I'm just showing you that one costs you more than the other. That the true cost of one is higher than the other. That's it, yeah.
What was the development feature of scenario 3 that needed that higher density mixed use product? Was it, if I said 27 acres, is that correct?
It's the 20.
I'll go back
So
to
there was they ran a kind of scenario for us. It said basically if you replicate promenade 31 times, this wasn't up there, but 31 times,
From
you
three nothing.
so it which basically ultimately ran into this 23 acres worth of mixed use. You could almost bring the city to neutral. Adding
That's-
that type of development, 23 acres of that type of development can bring us to that net neutral.
This is 9.2 million acres of square feet of commercial and 15,900 units of residential. And this one's 9.2 million commercial square feet and 17.1 on residential, so not even 2,000 more. That does net out as a positive. I'm sorry, that's up to you.
This was
It's just a scenario. It's totally up to you.
Yeah, it was compilation of single family, middle density, mixed use stuff. Samantha,
And apartments.
and apartments. It was a mixture of.
It looked like that.
residential uses.
That's what it looks like.
Yes.
Yeah. But it did have.
Oh, and you asked me about acreage though. Hang on.
There.
Yeah, this is,
I'm sure. It's
No.
probably 2 parking spaces per unit.
yeah, so it's 23 acres. You asked me 23, it's 23 here.
Less than.
Yeah. We just used it as a hypothetical. It's just a hypothetical. Yep. It's, it's an example of scenario 3, I believe.
Right, I think that when Andrew ran the numbers, I think he was trying to say that if you did replicate. The promenade at 23 acres.
Yeah.
I think that is with or without, that was, so scenario 3 technically is supposed to break even. So you can develop it, scenario 3 plus essentially looking at 23 acres of multifamily to make the city overall break even.
Cash.
Backwards.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen much worse, much worse, yeah. Again, it's life cycle, it's not your capital planning, it's not your enterprise planning. We're still meeting, if I may. We're still meeting, thank you. So yeah, it is, that's much, I've seen much worse. Yeah.
That's pretty average.
I'd say that's average, yeah. Yeah.
My question is, let's say those 23 acres are developed into me, like with Belmont, like do you have a population increase estimate? No. Okay, so it doesn't get spent on the question be. The city of Falls, we have 10 wells, that's a pilot drinking water system. There's this area from the exact numbers between 9 and 11 million, I think, for the water system that you had, like what we have versus what we would need. If you had, let's say, 3,000 more people coming to the city,
What was that?
take into account the amount of wells?
We don't look at that. We don't look
But
at
it
that.
does look at what we've been doing.
Yeah.
So it does think about like, okay, the cost of today is X, and so the water was like a difference between what, 7 and 11 million or something like that. That we're spending 7 now, and we need to be spending 11. It's kind of what something along those lines. So we would look at that average going forward as if we continue to have to spend that amount per acre, anyways.
Yeah, it's more such a concern, you know, like in the relay, just quarter, they just had to drill a new well, and it was, you know, well over $5 million. Not even for.
And with our waste and with our water and wastewater, those ones we're actually are keeping track pretty carefully. We're running the plans every 5 to 10 years and updating our fees every year to reflect the anticipated replacement methodology. So those are the fees that we are paying based on that scenario. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate the consultants mentioned balance because, you know, that's so obviously the point that we're trying to get to. If growth is inevitable, then how do we try and get it to pay for itself to the greatest extent that we can, but also without ruining the quality of life for the people who already live here? And, you know, there are 2 different sides of that scale that definitely have to be put in balance. One of the things that you mentioned, mixed use, and I have seen that. I think that's a great concept, but when I've seen it applied more, in most cases, it fails. The ground floor retail ends up empty because there's not enough parking provided for both residents and customers to be able to get to. And, you know, a lot of cities supplement it with, you know, making sure that it's oriented on transit lines and things like that. Don't really have.
And absolutely, that's the balance. You know, it is, we can ask for as much mixed use downtown as we want. But John and I were talking this morning as to how stuff begins to get developed. And, you know, do we need 3 competing coffee shops within a quarter of a mile? We're gonna you know, is that gonna be an issue? You know, so we recognize that we can ask for the ground floor retail. But we can also try and find that balance of what's really necessary for that ground. Because we do recognize that buildings need to be able to be self-sufficient. And they are often residential is once again subsidizing in those scenarios, often subsidizing commercial ground floor. A lot of developments can't even finance ground floor commercial. They rely on being financed for showing that the whole building will pencil with just the residents. It's an interesting scenario, but we want to look for that activity. That's the quality of life piece too, is that activity. And parking can come into play. Other times it doesn't whatsoever. Because if there's enough of a interest in going to an area, people are willing to park 2 blocks away and walk to those different centers that go to. So there's a balance, and you have to find what that sweet spot is. He was asking about the parking in the downtown previously. We do have a plan. The city does have a plan for parking in downtown, but it's slow to get developed. It takes its time. And at the end of the plan set, once it's developed, it'll be like enough parking.
Well, it sounds like it had to be modified recently because it was too draconian against parking.
We've got a couple of, I mean, we could require your state, like throughout the rest of the cities, require quite a bit of parking for residential units. In the downtown, we reduced it. We reduced it greatly, but then we had to add more to it in order to make it more feasible, tangible, feasible for today. Palatable, it's better, more palatable for today. So, and
You have a question?
Could you just go back to maybe the basics, like, so we're updating our comp plan, like, you guys are writing it, or do we hire Urban3 to write it? It's actually writing.
We don't.
so,
pick up that.
SCJ Alliance was actually hired as the comp plan stewards. They put together the text that comes out of public meetings, comes out of research, comes from public input. They're the ones that put it together. We have a comp plan. They're revising a handful of chapters of the future land use map. And Urban3 is basically providing additional information to help direct that process, to help provide input to the public.
We do an economic analysis.
They're doing the economics, yes.
That's what we do.
Whether you're gonna hear a lot of pushback, it's, well, I'd rather live on an acre lot, like one yard. I
And so,
understand maybe that doesn't financially support the city, but I don't like that.
Yeah.
and that's what we're talking about with balance.
It doesn't feel like a balance, so.
No, if there's like trucking, a ton of people in and everybody has to move out to let the apartments come in.
But you're just writing, the comp plan is like a recommendation in a way, right? It's not like this is how this is gonna be.
No, and so what tomorrow's exercise is, okay, you know, maybe one of the questions is gonna be, okay, if you're gonna see mixed use buildings, where do you wanna see those located at? If you wanna see, if apartments are gonna come in, where should those be located? There is the balance, because if we stay the way that we are today, we have to figure out how to raise taxes faster than we ever could. We actually can't legally, the state won't let us raise taxes as quickly as we need to in order to afford moving forward.
But can we slow growth and slow that down?
So if we slow growth, we again need to raise taxes faster than we should, faster than we can. Because we have to be able to plan to pay for life, pay for healthcare, the services, pay for what we are now. And that's the idea behind scenario 3+, is okay, how do we take advantage of the current infrastructure that we have? We have a lot of infrastructure, we have infrastructure in our downtown. If that gets developed out at a higher density, thicker, you know, higher intensity uses to support a downtown commercial center, that could help offset those costs much more fast.
But the same token, it could be determined that we're willing to accept the lower level of service. Our roads are gonna get a little more potholed, we're not gonna maintain them as much, because we don't wanna we don't wanna grow, we wanna keep small lots, we don't care that we're not gonna use as much revenue. Or it could be determined we're gonna raise taxes to some degree, I mean, we're willing to make those sacrifices and pay more ourselves than to deal with having as much intense growth.
Yeah, the service level is what we're having to look at, absolutely. You know, we're trying to look at that as a budget, during the budget cycle right now for the city is, okay, what do we look at if we had to modify our services in order to save on the overall cost of things, what do? You know, what's palatable to the public, you know? I've worked in other jurisdictions that were much tighter, financially than we even are. And those were the ones where, you know, the grass in the parks got to be 8 inches long before it got cut. Those are the ones that plowed the roads as little as they could. They, you know, those are the ones that only swept the city once a year. And the taxes in those places were much higher than they are here. So it's tough. It's a balance. It's trying to find a route forward and thinking smart about growth is happening. Growth will happen, but how does it happen and where? And our standard for planning is, okay, let's start with higher density in the center to allow for the suburban growth that, you know, you get your single family homes. So we need to find areas where we can consolidate that density. So we're not going to be, we are a larger city already. We're like the 9th largest in the state, which is insane.
But we are kind of low dense. When you look at the amount of acres they are, we're not very dense really from a dwelling unit.
Yeah, and we're the only city in this area that can grow. Pretty much.
Rather than Hayden,
Right.
it grows, but Coeur d'Alene just happens to be kind of landlocked between different cities or
Yeah.
with lake.
But cities that you dealt with that are similar to ours, that are doing it right, that can be used as a model. What cities, because you've referenced a lot of stuff, East United States, Midwest. What cities can we look to as a model that are very similar to us, that are less density, you know, a little more rural, and, you know, that are basically freedom states that are in this area, the Montana, city dealt with cities in Montana, or stuff like that, that are high growth, because those states are having the same fight we are. They're growing like crazy. So what cities have you dealt with in, you know, that are in our area that could be similar that we could look to for guidance?
I have yet to see an American city that is dealing with growth issues like this effectively. Because they don't want to make the difficult decisions.
Well, nor do we have the tools to look at the data like we can now.
Yeah, I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying, you know, your staff asked me about comps, and Mansfield, Texas is one of the best comps we could come up with. It's in a state that has very little regulation of land use. It's in a high growth area, and you can see what they did. They grew more densely. That's the choice they made.
Have you dealt with any cities in like Montana, Wyoming?
California,
Idaho.
Washington, Oregon, now in Idaho. We've looked at Montana. We're talking to Wyoming right now. We've looked at Colorado. We've done work in Arizona, all through the West. I have yet to see a city that is dealing with this effectively on an economic basis. So again, I want to go back to this. I hear you when you say quality of life, and I hear you when you say these are some of the things we want, and that's all very valid. All I'm showing you is your data. Can you afford to grow the way you're growing today? Or do you need to re-examine your growth trajectory, right? The market is putting pressure on you. There's only so much you can do to regulate that pressure. Because if you do pull back, then you've got higher taxes for everybody. If you grow too fast, you've got potentially lower taxes, but a poor quality of life, right? It's finding that magic middle.
Yeah.
Where can you do a little more compact development? I don't even like the D word. Density is a dirty word. How can you do more compact development that's going to be more economically productive for you in the future, so that your taxes don't go up as much as they would, right? They're going to go up. That's just reality. So those are the questions you have to ask yourself: is what are the trade-offs we're willing to make? I'm going to say that Bob and John are not going to say that to you, because that's a hard position for you all to be in. But I can tell you there isn't an American city that's figured it out yet. And this is the problem, because people have chosen to live in these areas because they're beautiful and wonderful. You're getting loved to death.
I think they're also escaping taxation in other places.
Perhaps.
And I think that, and I wonder about that, like, in the sense, I grew up here in Hayden and Coeur d'Alene, but I lived back in Connecticut for 10 years, and my taxes were substantially higher than. And there was no actual growth happening in terms of like population growth. And everybody there was trying to figure out, okay, how do we change things over? How do we get new employment centers? How do we get, you know, how do we put in a new, you know, apartment complex to replace the old apartment complex, you know, or whatever it was. But our costs were substantially higher because, again, I mean, there was a town that I didn't end up working for, but it was offering a job at, where the minimum lot size was 1 acre. And their taxes on your standard single family house was $10,000 to $15,000 a year. And it's
Probably twice that.
it's probably twice that, you know, if
Think about this, if we all have relatives and other people we know that live in cities that have implemented super dense housing and all these other things, and they're still bankrupt. They, you know, all they do is sacrifice quality of life, and the city still cannot meet its projected needs and everything else. So, you know, like you said, balance, but it's always nice to see at least during presentation, your quality of life, you mentioned once, which it never was, or balance, which it never was. Now, I understand it's all, this is what they do, right, you know, give you the facts of what I see. But I mean, we've all been in this scenarios, and have relatives in the scenarios where they did the answer, you can't buy parking at Walmart, you can't do all these things. And then, you know, all they did was the quality of life and they get benefits. So that's where you're trying to find the balance, which is, you know, it's nice to hear it's quality of life mentioned.
And
Yeah, because that shows us a priority.
Yeah.
And it may be, but it's just nice to hear it mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that, again, like, this was the fiscal impact analysis. You know, tomorrow with SCJ, as part of addressing or looking at the fiscal impact analysis as to how it affects growth, is that time to talk about quality, that time to look at envisioning. You know, can you imagine? I mean, you know, we look at that map and we start seeing how it's kind of filled in around we'll start filling in around the edges in the future. You know, we tied in some of those areas for this model to kind of, because we know that there's growth pressures looking at those sections of the city. So we want help from the public to guide us, like, okay, when the landowners there decide to take advantage of their private property rights and request to redevelop their old, you know, 5-acre farm into a subdivision, you know, what should the city be looking at as an allowed, you know, density level or use area? Is there an area that we should be focusing on, looking at more of a master planning effort of, okay, if we're going to build in this area, and instead of thinking about it in 5-acre increments of 20 houses or 32 houses, how do we look at the whole thing and encourage to allow for some of those developments to be a 1-acre estate property, but also some mixed use, maybe around a core. So you kind of start to think about, as we grow, you start thinking about those areas as sub areas of the city that they can create their own identity, their own neighborhood, their own, you know, their own center that they utilize frequently. That maybe somebody who lives in Crown Point will never go to, you know, Cortera East or whatever, or, you know, the expansion of Cortera onto the Bush Falls side someday. Maybe they never go over there because they don't need to. But it's part of the city that, you know, how do we get it to pay for itself, to be self-sustaining, to not drag down and not bring down the rest of the city that we're going to live in. You know, allow us to do